We don't always know how our votes are being counted, and it's not unreasonable to have some questions about our election security.
There is no serious person out there who would suggest somehow that you could even rig America's elections.
We've seen no evidence that any of our voting systems have been tampered with.
The November 3rd election was the most secure.
It was the most secure.
Most secure election
in American history, period.
What would it take to throw a presidential election in the U.S.? It'd have to be a huge concerted effort, a nationwide conspiracy, possibly involving 100,000 people or more, and the levels of funding required would be staggering. It's easy to believe the media and the politicians when they say it's impossible. But it's happened many times, and it's happening now on a larger scale than you might be ready to accept. Let's take a quick look back. In 1835, the legendary Davy Crockett had this to say after losing a bid for re-election to the House of Representatives. "I wish to inform the people of these United States what I had to contend against, trusting that the expose I shall make will be a caution to the people. I have been told by good men that some of the managers of the bank on the days of the election were heard to say that they would give $25 a vote for votes enough to elect Mr. Huntsman. For 14 years since I've been a candidate, I never saw such means used to defeat any candidate as were put in practice against me on this occasion. I have no doubt that I was completely rascaled out of my election, and I do regret that duty to myself and my country compels me to expose such villainy." One author described the vote of 1888 in this way: "Ballot fraud was so common that it developed its own vocabulary. Colonizers were groups of bought voters who moved en masse to turn the voting tide. Floaters flitted like honeybees wafting from party to party, casting ballots in response to the highest bidder. Repeaters voted early and often, and GOP ballots from Indiana were distributed wholesale to rascals who were divided into blocks of 5 and paid to cast them illegally." The public reaction to the 1888 scandal helped to change electoral history and establish the secret ballot. But it was by no means the end of the problems. Have you heard of the Battle of Athens? In the summer of 1945, the GIs came home from World War II to find that a political machine had taken over their Tennessee county. So they decided to put their own candidates on the ballot. On polling day, they witnessed officials letting minors vote and handing cash to adult voters. By the late afternoon, they began attempting to intervene in the fraudulent behavior, and they were physically assaulted and one of them shot. Then the elections were closed early, and officials and police officers barricaded themselves inside the jail to count the votes in private. The GIs laid siege to the jail and ordered that the ballot boxes be brought out and counted publicly as dictated by law. When the officials refused, the GIs ended the conflict by dynamiting the jail. Those inside immediately surrendered, the votes were counted, and the corrupt incumbent lost by a vote of 1270 to 2175. Now, there have been many other nationwide voting scandals over the years, including the Box 13 scandal with Lyndon B. Johnson in 1948, and Gordon Liddy and the Watergate scandal in 1972. But as the technology involved in counting the votes has evolved, a whole new set of vulnerabilities has emerged.
And in 2002, Congress passed the Help America Vote Act, offering states $3.9 billion to help administer federal elections and buy new voting equipment, which sounds great. But the then chair of the Election Assistance Commission, which distributed funding for the new machines, realized that there was a problem immediately.
I was forced to send $2.3 billion to the 50 states to buy equipment, even though the equipment was not ready to be bought.
So why'd you do it?
We had to do it. We begged Congress, let us do the research before we send the money, and Congress said no.
So the politicians knew these machines wouldn't work.
The politicians don't care. Washington believes that the machines can't be that bad because, after all, it produced them. So if they won the race, how bad can the machine be?
The machine can't be bad because it produced me. That is some faulty logic right there.
Anybody who trusts electronic voting machines should have their head examined.
Local criminal investigations into Mesa County Clerk Tina Peters' alleged voting machine security breaches continues.
Tina Peters admits she brought in a consultant to make a forensic copy of the Dominion voting system in Mesa County.
I continue to think that our voting machines are too vulnerable.
Voting machines in Georgia and Texas switch votes from one candidate to another.
Virtually every machine was broken into.
What did you see during the software update?
We've uncovered something that they're afraid of.
We didn't consider the machines.
The information found there is the Rosetta Stone.
They made a mistake and left the evidence in the machine.
And you can hide it as well.
It's only what the programmer tells it to say.
It's literally like the difference between going from pickpocketing to credit card fraud.
These people are being selected, not elected.
It's about who gets to count the vote.
This is not what we do in America.
You could make it all go away, though. You just keep your mouth shut. You could have your life back.
Can't unsee what I've seen.
However, as the new documentary 2000 Mules demonstrates, sometimes those old school vote harvesting methods are still the best. Regarding the 2020 election, a dedicated group has been able to prove election fraud on an unbelievable scale with a combination of cell phone tracking and surveillance video.
We were able to make purchase of data of people that had been near those drop boxes, but also near the organizations. In Atlanta, 242 people that went to an average of 24 drop boxes in 8 organizations during a 2-week period.
A mule is, by our definition, a person that is involved in picking up ballots from locations and running them to the drop boxes.
This is a smoking gun. This is O.J. Simpson being seen leaving the scene of the crime. I don't care how partisan you are. You can't dismiss all of this. A whole bunch of people in this country are going to go, oh my God.
I think that if every American saw that, I think it would move the needle.
It'll happen, as Ernest Hemingway said, gradually and then suddenly. Because it's not just how many people are going to watch this film, it's who's going to watch it. It's going to be lawmakers. It's going to be people that work for the Bureau. It's going to be someone somewhere with a conscience that has power and to say, this is a problem.
It can't be dismissed. It can't be dismissed.
They have ruined Election Day in the United States of America. That's provable. And that's enough for me to fight the left with every fiber in my body.
You're talking about extraordinary criminal activity, but there's a ton more, you would guess, that you have not even touched.
You are talking about 200,000-300,000 ballots that were just harvested in only your geolocated locations. But you are talking, what, 5% of America?
Yes. This is the tip of the iceberg.
The way to find it is these guys have the cell phone identification of all the mules, all of them. So law enforcement has to step in at this point, and their next step.
What were you doing 7
is
times?
Is to go and interview the mules. Who paid you?
Right.
Where'd you get the money?
Will any state's law enforcement do this?
This is a big question.
Lots of little tiny voters making little tiny changes to the ballots is still one of the best ways that bad actors can avoid detection. And it's common all across the nation. Here's a sampling of recent election fraud cases collected by the Heritage Foundation. Each of the cases in this database represents an instance in which a public official thought the fraud serious enough to act upon it, and each one ended in a finding that the individual had engaged in wrongdoing in connection with an election, hoping to affect its outcome, or that the results of an election were altered or sufficiently in question that it had to be overturned. And each one of these cases disenfranchised legitimate voters. And as our nation has become ever more wealthy and influential on the world stage, the stakes have only gotten higher. And the greater the deception becomes, the less the perpetrators want the American people to take a look behind the curtain. However, there are those who will no longer be deceived. For instance, 2 years after the 2020 election, the entire Texas GOP has issued a statement claiming the Biden victory is illegitimate. Election fraud has happened many times. It is happening now on an incredible, uncomfortable scale. The Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association is calling upon all Americans and law enforcement nationwide to come together in pursuit of the truth regarding the 2020 election. No one from either side of the aisle ought to be against honest, professional, and independent investigations. We ask for all Americans to demonstrate civility and cooperation as we pursue the truth.